pays Twitter $3 million. Not one, not two, $3 million to censor American citizens. It's not a ploy when the Department of Homeland Security tries to set up a disinformation governance board, because we all know that the Department of Homeland Security can tell what's good speech and what is bad speech, what's I mean, you got to be kidding me. I tell you what, dozens of whistleblowers who've come talk to Republican staff on the Judiciary Committee don't think this is a ploy. That's why they came to talk to us. They know how serious this is. The former Democrat chair of the Judiciary Committee is in the press today saying we're going to fight this tooth and nail. This is political. But meanwhile, the former Democrat chair of the Intelligence Committee pressured Twitter to censor a journalist. You've got to be kidding me. This is the most important. This is about the First Amendment, something you guys used to care about. And I'd actually hoped we could get bipartisan agreement on protecting the First Amendment, the 5 rights we enjoy as Americans under the First Amendment. Your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, right to petition the government, freedom of press, freedom of speech. Every single one's been attacked in the last 2 years. Government was telling people they couldn't go to church just a few years ago. Your right to assemble, your right to petition the government. The Democrats kept the Capitol closed. You couldn't, as a citizen, couldn't come to your Capitol that you pay for to address your member of Congress, to redress your grievances, because Nancy Pelosi wouldn't let you in. Freedom of the press, I just told you what the head of the Intel Committee tried to do to a journalist. The most important right we have, though, is your right to talk. Because if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith. You can't share your faith. You can't petition your government. The right to speak is the most important, and that's what they're going after. And that's why we've had dozens of whistleblowers come talk to us. We want to focus on that because we want it all to stop. We want the double standard to stop. This idea that if you're a pro-life activist, you're going to get your door kicked in, you're going to get arrested and handcuffed in front of your 7 kids and your spouse for simply praying in front of an abortion clinic and telling the guy who was harassing your son to knock it off. You're going to have the FBI raid your home. But the protest that went on,
I'd like to know. I think the American people deserve to know. Do you believe in modern monetary theory? Just keep spending money and it doesn't matter? I don't. I think that's foolish. I think it's reckless. I think it undermines our dollar. I think it undermines our financial stability. More importantly, I think it makes it impossible for us to make good decisions about how to make policy and execute policy. How can you make a tough decision about whether or not you need to buy a bomber, or whether or not you need to fund a particular grant program, or fund a particular entitlement that is way oversubscribed and out of money? How can you make a decision about that if the answer is just keep printing money? I mean, that's my question. And I just would suggest there's no more important question for us to answer. Because if we don't, then we're never going to come to agreement on the policies. Ever. If I go home and I talk to my wife and I say, look, we're going to cap our spending at our 2022 levels of spending, then we've got to make choices. We got to decide, well, are we going to just not make our mortgage payment? No, we got to do that. Are we going to not feed our kids? Well, no, we got to feed our kids. Are we going to have electricity and heat? Well, we'd like to have that. Then comes the discretionary questions. Do you take a vacation? Do you get a new car rather than patching together your 15-year-old car? Do you send your kids to a certain school? Do you save a certain amount of money for college? Maybe you forego college because you look at college and go, why am I going to spend $300,000 to send them to a college that are going to teach my kids that America's evil? I'll save that for another rant. But that's my point. We have to do that as families. But this body never does it. Ever. We pretend to do it. We pretend to do it. The point of the agreement reached last week was to open this body up, empower rank and file, but also importantly, establish some parameters for how we fund the federal government. And those parameters should be that we set limits. And if you set limits, Now you have to sit down and figure it out. But here's the problem. I don't believe that Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats want to sit down at the table and figure out how to limit spending. I don't believe that the President of the United States or his current Director of the Office of Management and Budget or any of his team wants to sit down at the table with us and figure out how to limit spending. But I've not even heard him come down and say, well, fine, you're right, Chip. We're spending more money than we have, and we're racking up more debt, so we believe we need to increase taxes. Okay, well, come make your offer. We'll raise taxes. Okay, show me how raising those taxes is going to eliminate the deficit. He whispers, it's not. Show me how raising those taxes is not going to undermine economic growth, make it more difficult for American people to get jobs, undermine the prosperity of the American people. Show me that. Come demonstrate that. He whispers, that's not really that easy to do. But our job is to responsibly represent the American people. It's not to govern. We often use that word. That's crazy. We don't govern. We represent. And our job is to represent our constituents, and I don't know any constituents, frankly, even my most left-leaning constituents, to be honest, I don't know any constituents who are saying, oh yeah, please go up there and spend more money we don't have. I would just suggest that according to the CBO, we're going to see another $15.7 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years. That's the truth. The truth is that in fiscal year 2022, we collected a record $4.9 trillion in taxes, nearly $1 trillion more than the previous year. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We have an overpromise problem. Had a reporter come up to me in the hallway a minute ago and said, Mr. Roy, is there any circumstances in which you're going to support providing more aid to Ukraine? How on earth are we having that conversation on January 11th after on December 23rd we just added another $45 billion for Ukraine? And the reporter responded and said, well, but they say that it's really important to get more money to beat Russia. Oh, really? Well, what do our experts say? And what is our responsibility to pay for that? Or do we just write a check anytime a world leader comes and says, but it's really important for my people that you write me a check? I know. I want someone to write me a check. Minus all the ethics stuff, don't go write all that. Look, the truth is, my colleague from Arizona, my friend from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is 100% correct that mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, all of the related expenditures that go along with that are driving the vast majority of the debt that we're accumulating every year. That is correct. But if you're not willing to take on discretionary spending, how are you going to take on Social Security, Medicare, and reforming those to work when the first ad that's going to be run is going to be pushing Granny off the cliff, if you dare even have a conversation about the issue? Will any colleague, I will make an invitation to any colleague in the chamber, but particularly my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, come down here and talk about Social Security and Medicare and all of our mandatory spending. But I'll issue the same request that my colleagues on this side of the aisle acknowledge that you cannot hide behind Social Security, Medicare, and mandatory spending to say that we shouldn't limit discretionary spending, defense spending, because, oh, that's an insignificant part of the budget. It is significant. And it is significant not just because of the trillions of dollars of debt that those spending accounts for defense and education and Department of Justice and Commerce and every other agency and Homeland Security. It's not just because we're spending too much money there and it's adding up to deficits and debts. It's because we're funding the very agencies that are undermining us. We're funding the bureaucrats that are undermining the current individual in America that's out there as an entrepreneur trying to get a job started. It's undermining my friend Scott Smith in Loudoun County because we label him a domestic terrorist because the FBI was brought in along with the National School Board Association. They all coordinated to say, okay, let's label them a domestic terrorist. We're funding a Department of Homeland Security that wants to continue to create or execute policies that invite more people to come to our border, endangering them and us. The reason you care about discretionary spending is because it funds the policies of government, of the bureaucracy, of the administrative state that undermines our well-being, undermines our prosperity. We have the opportunity now, right now, as Republicans, to lead the House of Representatives forward to change. We should, in fact, change. Last week was a monumental step forward to changing this institution, to opening it up, to allowing rank and file members to have a say, to putting more diversity on our committees, to having more debate in committees, coming down to the floor and fighting for the people that we represent. But all of that will be for naught if we don't embrace wholeheartedly the mission, the hard mission of limiting the spending that is destroying our country and demanding that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle come sit down at the table so that we can actually do our jobs for the people we represent. And then finally, sending a message to the United States Senate, to the Democrat-led United States Senate, to the Democrat President of the United States at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, that it is not enough to give speeches, it's not enough to oppose what we produce out of the people's house. The American people spoke in November. They want us to be responsible. They want us to limit spending. They want
2018, you wrote a book.
Yes.
I want to read a section from that book. It's a section where you relate you and your family attended oral arguments at the court. You were there in the courtroom, and that directly involved your brother Paul, also a reverend. And I just want to read this section. You said, with the single rap of the gavel, Chief Justice William Rehnquist announced, we'll hear argument first this morning in number 95-1065, Reverend Paul Schenck and Dwight Saunders versus Pro-Choice Network of Western New York. Paul and I winked at each other, knowing we had made history with that reverend in his name. It had been a minor victory when we persuaded the court that reverend should remain before Paul's name, even though we had been told repeatedly that legal briefs never included such titles. You thought it was important that, obviously based on what you said, you thought it was important that the title reverend be in front of Paul's name, is that right?
Correct.
And why was that?
Because we saw it as a religious liberty matter, and that would make it clear that it fit in that category.
Did Chief Justice Rehnquist really say that, the way I just read it from your book?
I can't say that I remember that.
Well, you're pretty darn specific here. You got the number, case number 95-1065. Very next word says Reverend Paul Schenck. You made it a big deal. Thought it's the first time it's ever happened. I'm just asking, did it really happen?
I wish I could tell. I would have to go back and review that.
So it may not have?
Possibly not.
Why do you say possibly not? You were emphatic in your book.
I would have to go back.
We did go back. We did go back, and I got the transcript right here. Proceedings, 10:05 a.m., Chief Justice Rehnquist. We'll hear argument first this morning in number 95-1065, Paul Schenck and Dwight Saunders versus Pro-Choice Network of Western New York. Did you hear it?
I did.
Was there a word missing?
Title, Reverend.
Yeah, wasn't in there. In your book, you said it was a big deal, so much so that you winked at your brother. Did you wink at your brother?
Yes.
What'd you wink for if it wasn't in the title?
Well, it was our case.
But that's not, you said you winked because they included Reverend in the title, and the transcript says Mr. Rehnquist didn't.
Perhaps not.
Perhaps? Court reporter get it wrong? Did he say it and the court reporter get it wrong?
Well, then,
Well, we got the audio too. I'm going to play that for everyone to hear.
We'll hear argument first this morning, number 95-1065, Paul Schenck and Dwight Saunders versus Pro-Choice Network of Western New York.
Reverend, did you hear that?
I did.
Was there a word missing that's different from what you put in your book?
A title, yes.
What was that title?
Reverend.
Reverend was not there. Right? Did you wink at your brother?
I think I did. In fact, I think I actually
Oh, wow.
poked him.
So now you got more details. You got the key detail wrong.